A new EWTN original docudrama will premiere later tonight on EWTN, dealing with the misconceptions surrounding the Inquisition. We'll talk to the producer and the historian behind the 4-part miniseries tonight, so please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. And we've got guests from a couple different parts of the world. They are two very talented gentlemen with different vocations, but the same goal, which for tonight's episode will be to set the record straight about the Inquisition. Let's take a quick look at a little clip of what they've done.
Jesus calls us to confess our sins and he will forgive us. And when we give alms and pray, we must do so in secret. These penitents who process during Holy Week in Spain are dedicated to prayer and almsgiving. They are covered from head to foot. They do not speak. No one knows who they are except God. Although we sin, most of us are not heretics. In the past, there have been many heresies that have tried to corrupt Christians. The Church put in place various inquisitions to help Christians and to save lives and souls. However, the myths and legends of the Inquisitions are laced with images of cruelty and terror. But as the terms myths and legends imply, they are indeed false. They were developed over 400 years ago to vilify Spain, as she was the Catholic superpower of the age. Today, a new generation of historians are studying the actual records, and a very different picture has emerged.
Joining us now to talk about the Inquisition, this 4-part docudrama miniseries premiering on EWTN tonight through Saturday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, is the producer and director, along with the historical consultant for the film. Mr. Stefano Mazzeo is the producer-director, and Dr. Thomas Madden, the historical expert helping along with it. So please welcome them. Dr. Madden, Stefano. Now, Stefano, your name is certainly very Italian, but you don't live in Italy.
No, I live in England. I'm originally from Cornwall in the southwest of England.
Cornwall in the southwest. Yeah. That's a fascinating area. I've always wanted to go there in particular. And Dr. Madden, you are a professor. Where do you teach?
I'm a professor of medieval history at St. Louis University.
St. Louis University in St. Louis. And we want to let our viewers know that prior to producing this series on the Inquisition, Stefano and Dr. Madden teamed up last year to bring audiences another great 4-part mini-series on the Crusades, which, by the way, won one of the top prizes at the 2016 International Catholic Film and Multimedia Festival in Niepokalanów, Poland. So congratulations on your award. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
You shared the video with us on the Crusades. It was very helpful. Now let's deal with the Inquisition, because this, I've heard estimates as high as 12 million people were killed by the Inquisition, especially for witchcraft. And this would be horrible. So what say you?
You can make up any number you like, but that's it's not relevant. The 12 million, in the pre-modern world, it's not possible to kill 12 million. You need some pretty good technology to kill people at that rate.
And I also pointed out when I heard this, that in the Middle Ages, the population of
Right.
Europe was 25 million.
Right.
If they killed half of the people.
That's like the Black Death. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. No, the Inquisition and the witch hunts are two completely different things. In fact, they were opposed to each other.
The Inquisition is not the same as the witch hunts?
No, it has absolutely nothing to do with it.
I mean, the Inquisition wasn't even at Salem, Massachusetts, killing those witches?
No, those were all English Protestants holding their tribunals.
Never mind.
No,
So what is the Inquisition? Let's get that straight, so we
Sure.
can sift through some of the nonsense that's said about it.
yeah, the Inquisition was a legal inquiry, as the name suggests, into the possibility of whether somebody who had been accused by the secular courts of heresy, which was a capital offense in all of the kingdoms of Europe. It was
Catholic and Protestant.
well, I'm talking about the Middle Ages, where
Okay.
there are no
Right.
Protestants.
Okay.
So all throughout Europe, it was a capital offense to be a heretic. It was usually taken care of by mob justice, and if that didn't happen, then the royal courts would come in. The Inquisition was created in the 12th century by the Church in order to put to put a legal framework in so that you could determine whether someone who was accused of heresy was in fact a heretic or not. That was the first thing, to bring justice to the situation. But the second was to give that person, even if they were a heretic, an opportunity to simply say, well, I made a mistake, or I recant, I repent, and it would be an opportunity again to bring them back into the fold. The only reason that the Inquisition, though, was created by the Church, because before this, for 1,000 years, the Church simply used persuasion, persuasio. The reason the Church created it in the 11th century is because Europe's monarchs and their governments were prosecuting people for heresy. And so the Church interposed itself between the accused and the fires that would burn them up otherwise.
And something that I would like to bring up, because a lot of modern people would bristle. Oh, how dare they persecute somebody for a heresy? What about freedom of thought? And as the church against freedom of thought? I would suggest, and maybe you're still in the academic world, aren't there certain universities where the politically incorrect can get you fired?
Yeah, I mean, all civilizations, all cultures have those things which are considered taboo, or are considered impolite, or that you should be punished for saying. We have plenty of heresies today. Mm-hmm. They're just different heresies.
Yes.
And they punish you in different ways. They may not burn you at the stake, but they'll ruin your career. And we see it all the time. But in the Middle Ages, the church became interested in this because people were being sentenced to death for heresy without any fair trials, judged by people who did not know any theology themselves, and frequently they would just burn them at the stake just to be safe, because they might be a heretic.
And that kind of mob justice is not justice at all. You know, when we had lynch mobs in this country, that we didn't invent the lynch mob. That's happened elsewhere, and it still goes on today, you know, as we've seen in a number of cities recently. What motivated you, Stefano, to want to make this into a video series?
Well, the Inquisition is the second part of the Black Legend trilogy, the Crusades being the first, the Inquisition being the second, and next year hopefully we'll be able to do the Reformation. Mm-hmm. That's the plan, that's what we're going to try to do. But the Inquisition is particularly interesting because the Inquisitors were thought of at the time as a bunch of liberals. They were
They were liberal judges?
Yes, they were, compared to what was going on at the time, they were considered to be a lot more lenient, a lot more kinder to the accused, and they would do their best to get people off. But they were mainly interested in whether they were a heretic or not. But if they confessed, they were always let off with a penance, like going on pilgrimage to Santiago or something like that. But the original heresy which brought about the Inquisition was the Cathar heresy. Now, the Cathars were a strange sect. They were almost like the culture of death would be today. They believed in euthanasia, in contraception, abortion, and homosexual acts, because they stopped life. They didn't like life, and that's why they were the original culture of death.
It's something for folks to understand that the Cathari thought that the physical body was evil.
Yeah.
So having a baby was an evil act.
Yes, they thought babies were demons.
And therefore, a homosexual act, which can't produce a child, was more acceptable than a procreative act.
Quite, yeah.
You know, and also if you were about to die, but maybe you started to recover a little bit, suicide, assisted suicide or euthanasia was their solution.
Yes, indeed, and we show that
Were
in
they
episode
modern
1.
politics?
Pardon?
Sounds like modern
Yeah, it does,
politics.
doesn't it? Yeah, quite. Yeah, very much the religion of today are the Cathars, I would say.
Yeah.
They're very much into the culture of death and all that. So the church put in the Inquisition to try and find out who really were Cathars and who were not. And the Cathars were very clever at avoiding, and we try and act out one of those scenes of the Bernagui, how it shows the inquisitors how to operate.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have another clip I'd like to show where you're speaking, Dr. Madden, about the Inquisition trying to do fair treatment of the accused. Let's take a look at that clip.
In 1234, the Inquisition was established, and along with the Dominicans and the Franciscans, it was charged with the task of converting the heretics such as Cathars and Valdensians. By now, these heretics were often being attacked by mobs or denounced to secular lords.
Before the Inquisition had even been instituted, secular lords were already arresting people and burning them at the stake for being heretics. The Catholic Church became involved in this by putting the Inquisition in, and that Inquisition was designed to be a buffer between the accused and the fires. Because in most cases, the people who were judging the accused were not competent to judge them. The creation of the Inquisition also allowed the church to do what it was supposed to do, and that is save souls. The rather surprising fact is that the Inquisition actually saved lives. The people were already being burned at the stake before the Inquisition. The purpose of the Inquisition was to save the souls that were possible, and even those that were not, to make sure that they were being treated fairly.
So, one of the questions then, in the history of the Inquisition goes from 1234.
Really, 1184.
1184, all right, all the way until the early 1800s.
At the end of the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, the Spanish Inquisition ended in the early 1800s. In that 600 plus year history, about how many people were actually executed? Well, first of all, did the Inquisition execute anybody?
Well, no. I mean, an Inquisition, the Church's Inquisitions, they were not trials. These were fact-finding procedures in which evidence would be heard, and then they would make a judgment as to whether there was sufficient evidence to go on to the trial. So they could not convict anyone.
Okay, so it's not even a trial. It's just an inquiry,
Right.
a pre-trial inquiry,
Right.
as we call it today.
Right, it's an inquest or a grand
Yes.
jury trial.
The church never executed anyone.
Yeah. So
That was not the job of the church. The church clerics were forbidden to pronounce the death penalty. So anyone who says that the Catholic Church executed so many people just don't know history. Right. They don't know what an inquisition was. An inquisition could not pronounce the death penalty. An inquisition could only find a person guilty of heresy.
And it could declare an anathema on somebody.
Yeah.
It could declare anathema sit. That would be within the competence of the church.
Right.
But
and the assumption was, and they knew that the state, that the monarch or whoever the lord was, would then respond to that and quickly find that person guilty summarily, and then either execute them or give them what the punishment it was.
Yes.
But then my question would be the same, about how many people who were found, suspected, how many people died as a result of this inquest or inquisition over that 600 plus years?
The general figure, and there are debates about it, but the general figure is roughly around 10,000 people over those centuries. About 3,000 or maybe 3,500 of those would have been the Spanish Inquisition in the first years of the Spanish Inquisition. And you have to remember, the Spanish Inquisition actually wasn't the Church's Inquisition in any case. It was the Inquisition of the Spanish monarchy. In fact, the Pope wrote several times to the monarchs objecting to the way the Spanish Inquisition was being run. So, but if we just, for the sake of argument, take all of the Inquisitions that existed throughout the Middle Ages and the early modern period, the around 10,000 is usually the number you hear.
Right, and and again, as you say, the Spanish Inquisition was not really run by the church. Right. It was more a concern of the monarchy, especially after they had reconquered Spain from the Moors.
Right. The Spanish Inquisition really had, in its early years, had one main interest, and that was Jews who had converted to Catholicism. They became convinced wrongly that many of these Jews, many of whom were second or third generation Catholics, were actually secret Jews. This has been demonstrated to be completely false. These people were not secret Jews. They were devout Catholics. Many of them were bishops. Many of them were papal counselors.
Well, Torquemada,
yes, right,
who was the leader of the Inquisition at one point, his family were
Jewish,
converted Jewish.
Right, the conversos. Yeah, so really the Spanish Inquisition got started because there were rumors created by essentially the old nobility of Spain who were upset that there were so many new families coming in, Jewish families, very wealthy families that had formerly been Jewish. And many of them also kept a lot of the kind of cultural components. They were very proud of them. So they still might dress Jewish or eat kosher. Yeah. And so they began saying that this was, in essence, it was a grand conspiracy of the Jews to destroy the Catholic Church and destroy Spain by getting in and then destroying it from within. And when they tested this out by starting the small Inquisition, well, of course, all of their enemies came out of the woodwork and immediately, both Jewish and Christian, and said, yes, that person is a crypto-Jew. And that's what got it started.
Right. But that violent period lasted how long with the Spanish Inquisition?
It's about its first 8 or 9 years.
First 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, and it was done completely contrary to the forms that any Inquisitions had been done before. Rules of evidence were not being properly used. They were taking any kind of denunciations. It was, in fact, that's why several popes wrote to the monarchs in Spain objecting, saying these people are not, you're not even giving them a chance to be properly catechized. So if these may be people who just never learned the faith properly.
Right.
I think it's important to stress there that this is an abuse. It's not the Catholic Church. It's an abuse by individuals. It wasn't the teachings of the Catholic Church.
Right.
Like the trial of Joan of Arc, that was an abuse of the system by local clerics. The Pope
it was an abuse mainly in the service of a political issue.
Yes.
Where Joan of Arc was leading a French army to drive out the English and their Burgundian allies. And that seems to be more a political issue.
It was a political thing.
Anything religious.
Yeah, that's right.
something else, though, then. Why? Given that there are over all these centuries, 10,000, there's a few years, 7, 8 years of aberration in the Spanish Inquisition. Otherwise, it's not, very deadly at all. And why are all of these stories told about the horrors? The Iron Maidens, and which was a torture device that you'd put somebody inside, and there'd be these knives or spikes that would pierce their flesh and such. Where does all that come from?
Well, the Iron Maiden was a commercial artifact. It was never really used. Well, it was never used as a torture. It was a commercially produced object for torture museums and exhibitions.
Wait a minute.
It was never actually used.
Are you saying that the Inquisition never used
the
Iron Maiden?
Inquisition never used the Iron Maiden? No.
That's made up?
That's a total fallacy. It was never used.
What network was reporting that?
Oh.
This sounds like modern news where they're making stuff up.
Well, yes, they do.
So the Iron Maiden never was used.
No.
It was invented when?
Well, it was invented about 250 years ago, as a thing you'd see in a fairground. It was for museums of their days. It was for shows. It was also made in Germany. It wasn't Spanish at all. They were made to. Yes, I know, it's funny, isn't it?
Except for the fact that people believe that was used.
Well, yes.
I've seen on other networks that people claim that this was used in the Inquisition, but it was invented when the Inquisition was coming to an end.
Yes, it was never it was never used.
And so this is all phony baloney.
Right. The reason that
I don't want to give baloney a bad name, but that's what this sounds like.
The reason the Spanish, in its heyday, the Spanish Inquisition was known as not only one of the most lenient courts. You do actually have cases of Spaniards who were arrested by the civil courts for just a petty crime like stealing a pig. And then when they got to the prisons, they were so bad for the royal courts, they would purposefully blaspheme so they would be moved to the Inquisition court prisons because they were very nice. So it had a reputation not only for being state of the art in its ability once they got past the problems of the first years, but also for being very lenient. If anything, people complained that they were letting heretics off.
All right. Now let me just take it one other step. You're claiming that a lot of these legends, that were about the horrors of the Inquisition. There was that comedy, The History of the World Part 1, where the Inquisition had a whole big section about how horrible it was trying to convert Jews. Did the Inquisition try to convert Jews?
No.
So that's not true either?
No, the Spanish Inquisition and no Inquisitions. Inquisitions don't have jurisdiction over anyone except a Catholic accused of heresy. So you could not, in fact, be brought before an Inquisition if you were not a Catholic who had been accused by someone of heresy.
All right, then, let me we got to get some clarity here so we don't sound like we're one of the other news networks. But what evidence can you provide that these things did not happen? You're saying they didn't happen. What evidence do you have to back your position up?
There are literally hundreds of thousands of pages of inquisitional records. These were, as I say, state-of-the-art courts. They kept track of everything that happened in those tribunals. They recorded the witnesses, they recorded when they were there, they recorded when they had lunch. They recorded what was said, and then they recorded the deliberations. Scholars have been looking at these now over the last 20 or 30 years, but we have many more to see. There are vast storehouses, not just for the Spanish Inquisition, but Inquisitions all across Europe during the Middle Ages.
So you've got the transcripts of the courts like we would have
Right.
in our courts, which may actually be a reflection of that as a model. The Inquisition provided a model for modern courts
Yes,
to
indeed.
keep records of the trials so you can go back. And the Inquisition has no records of trying to force Jews to convert or any of these other things that are said about the Iron Maiden and the other torments.
It is nonsense.
Christians were forbidden, A, to persecute Jews, or B, to force baptism on them, to force them to become Christian. And in fact, according to canon law that was developed in the Middle Ages, if a mob rose up, as they sometimes did, and just grabbed Jews and took them and forced them to be baptized, if they rejected that, if the Jews rejected it within a reasonable amount of time, then it didn't count. They were not baptized, and they could go back
Because
to
they
their
didn't give their own will. It's not magic to get baptized. You have to make an act of the will to accept the grace of faith and accept baptism. Let's take a look. What about the Roman Inquisition? Let's take a little bit of a clip talking about a typical trial at the Roman Inquisition.
A typical tribunal of the Roman Inquisition was made up of a cardinal appointed by the Pope, who was assisted by 2 Dominicans. It also had a number of consultants who were experts in canon law and theology. In the case of witchcraft, they simply thought that most witches were deluded individuals. The Inquisition would not take action unless there was very strong evidence that harm had been done to another person. Most Inquisition witch trials took place because of a denunciation by a jealous neighbor.
Come closer, my child. You have confessed to being a witch. Why should we believe that you are one?
I have special powers.
The tribunals were made up of legally minded men. They were university-trained lawyers and theologians. Those trying to denounce women for flying on broomsticks were treated with skepticism.
You say you can fly? How do you do this? Do you sprout wings?
No, but I can fly on a broom and up a chimney and even through a keyhole.
So why don't you fly up the chimney and escape?
Yes, take your time. We can wait.
Are you lying to us? Lying is a serious sin. And you are lying to members of the Church's Holy Inquisition. Are you lying? Or are you a witch?
No. I'm sorry, Your Eminence, I'm not a witch. But I knew that if I confessed, I would just be given a penance. And I was afraid of my neighbour, who's always been jealous of me.
Tell us who this neighbour is.
She was once my friend, but she wanted my husband and he chose me. She is Signora Cecilia Castiglione.
You are free to go. But go to confession. You should never lie. It is a sin. And you will get yourself into even worse trouble.
Yes, my lord. I mean, no, my lord. Thank you, my lord.
They needed proof and evidence. The witch-burning hysteria that swept through the mainly Protestant Northern Europe did not really affect the Catholic countries. This was largely due to the formal legal process of the Inquisition.
So the Inquisition really didn't take the witchcraft craze seriously at all. They didn't deny that there might be witches, but they didn't believe that most of these people were witches. And they let them go.
They thought they were deluded, most of them.
Yeah.
Witchcraft is real, of course, but most of the witchcraft hysteria that swept through Northern Europe was nonsense. They would blame women for causing things like cold winters where crops failed, so they'd burn a few witches. But that would never happen in the Catholic countries because you had an Inquisition to find out what was really happening. And 9 times, perhaps 99 times out of 100, they would let them go because,
Right.
you know, flying is just impossible.
Right, right. Pace Harry Potter. This is important to keep in mind because the terrible legends and falsehoods, in some ways, strike me, because I watched through all 4 episodes, and it strikes me that it was a cover-up to take attention away from the fact that in a lot of the northern countries that were mostly Protestant at this time, they were prosecuting witches. England, I think it was about 50,000 witches in England. Was it that many?
I don't think it was that many, but I know in Scotland they did burn 1,500 witches.
Mm-hmm.
And in Geneva, Calvin himself burnt 45 witches.
Yeah.
So Calvin, the great reformer, was presiding over witch burning. So, I mean...
More so than the Inquisition.
More, the Inquisition didn't do that.
And it's almost as if they're projecting back onto the Inquisition, which had no sway in their country. There was no Inquisition in Holland and England.
Right, that's the bizarre thing that we think of today. Oftentimes, because of these myths that swirl around these historical events, we think of witch trial and Inquisition as virtually the same thing, when in fact they are directly opposed to each other. It was the Inquisition that stopped witch trials. That when the witch craze swept Europe, it was Inquisition that stopped that fire from coming into Spain or Italy, because the Inquisition courts were there to take care of it.
I remember reading a story about a New Age woman in Australia who had, gone to her past lives, and she's discovered that in her past life she was a nun who was burned at the stake by the English Inquisition. And I said to the crowd, as I read about this, I said, there was no English Inquisition. She's making this stuff up out of her imagination. And she's also saying that I was a nun in that life. In this life, I'm going to be a libertine because I deserve a little bit more fun than I had in that life. No, it sounds as goofy as ever. So at any rate, we're going to have this Inquisition 4-part miniseries. It will begin tonight. It'll go each night at 9:30 from October 26th to the 29th. And that'll be 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time here on EWTN and on EWTN.com. We urge you to take a look at it so you can know what some of the facts are and undo them. But we also want you to stick around with us because we're going to come back in about 2 minutes with questions from you and our studio audience, so please stay with us. All right, we are ready for some questions. I'm ready for them. You ready for them? Get up. Let's start off with James. Hello, James.
Hello, Father Mitch.
Where are you calling from?
Pennsylvania.
Great. And what's your question?
I had always learned that the best way to survive as a Catholic in the Inquisition was just to properly recite the Apostles' Creed with no errors. Is that true?
All right, gentlemen?
Well, if you could say all of the Apostles' Creed and believe it, then that would get you out of most problems. You would not, however, have to have it memorized. You would, the inquisitors would ask you questions. That's why they were inquisitors. But in general, usually they had a particular heresy in mind, and so they would not be too worried that you were, for example, an Arian Christian, because there were none of those. So they wouldn't bother about the Christology and the
divinity
the
of
creed.
Christ and
That's
humanity
right.
of Christ.
But for a Cathar, they would be very interested in your understanding of his humanity.
Yes.
That would be quite important to them.
Yeah, so they dealt with not just general statement of faith, but they wanted to know specifically, do you deny this element?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, because there would be some kind of condemnation that brought that person there.
Sure. All right. Again, that's what you do in any trial.
Right.
You know, you don't ask somebody can you recite the law code for the state of Alabama?
Right.
When you come, no. Did you kill this guy? That's what we want to find out. Well, we have another question here from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Good to have you. Welcome. And your question?
That's a two-part question. When, how, and why was the truth first distorted? And do you suspect that any of the demonic cults and or secret societies were behind smearing the Catholic name?
Okay, that's an interesting question.
I mean, I think where it really began first was in England and Holland in the period of the Protestant Reformation. This was a period which was, obviously there was a lot of polemics being written back and forth. In the English case, particularly because they had so many different brands of Protestantism, they looked at Spain and considered that the only way that you could have a civilization, a society with only one religion, must be because you've oppressed and persecuted all the rest out. Mm-hmm. And also they were at war with Spain for quite a long time. And this fit into their larger view of the Spanish as being backwards, and they saw themselves as free men. Right. And therefore the Spanish have to be the opposite. And so this is where you begin. Now the rest of it gets added in by the Enlightenment writers, who considered the entire Middle Ages to be a period of dark superstition, where people are just basically, the church is using them as puppets. And so the rest of that got built in over time. As far as whether there were cults or something, or secret societies behind this, there weren't really any secret societies in that period. Now there will later be Freemasonry, and Freemason will certainly...
But not till early 1700s.
Mid 1700s. And then, and even then, they will latch on to the Inquisition, but it will be because they'll say the Inquisition was an attempt to destroy reason, which was somehow they make that into the Templars. Right. And they view themselves as the Templars. But in the time when these myths were being created, they came late to that party.
And one of the ironies is that when somebody becomes a Mason, they take a blood oath that if you reveal any secrets of the Masonic Lodge, you go across from ear to ear and then across your stomach and down to show that if I reveal the secrets of the Masonic Lodge, then I will be cut from ear to ear and disemboweled. That was what the oath was. That's one of the reasons the Catholic Church forbids membership in the Masonic Lodge. You cannot take a blood oath to kill yourself or anybody else. That's forbidden. We have Teresa on the line. Hello, Teresa.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Thank you. And where are you from?
New Hampshire.
Great. And your question?
Well, I'd like to thank the gentlemen for what they're doing. I find it very enlightening. I had a question because it made me think of St. Teresa of Avila. And I thought I had seen in her life story being portrayed in several movies that she had fear of the Spanish Inquisition and was someone that they were particularly interested in what she was doing with the reformation of the Carmelite order. And is that true or false?
So did the Inquisition go, to have their interest piqued by St. Teresa of Avila's reform of the Carmelite order, and did she have need to fear the Inquisition in Spain?
No, she didn't really have any fear of the Inquisition. What happened was they did look at St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross, because they were, at that time there was the Alumbrados, who were a kind of unorthodox spiritualists, and they were fearing these Alumbrados, that they were perverting the spirituality of the church. Mm-hmm. But I think that any case against St. Teresa of Avila was dismissed even before it came before them.
Right. Now, they, by the way, Dostoevsky is another one who talks about the Inquisition, and there's a famous chapter, the Grand Inquisitor, in his Brothers Karamazov. And he portrays the Grand Inquisitor as a Jesuit. Were the Jesuits in charge of this?
No.
So we're going to lay all the Inquisition right at the feet of the Dominicans.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Just wanted that clear.
Yes, the Dominicanes. Yes.
Yes.
And actually, St. Ignatius was arrested a couple times by the Inquisition in Spain.
Right.
But he went up to Paris, where the Inquisition wasn't problematic, and finished his education there. We have another question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
Connecticut.
And good to have you here. And what's your question?
I'd heard that the printing press was invented by a Protestant during the Spanish Inquisition times, and that with the help of the printing press, a lot of propaganda was produced against the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Is that true?
All right, there's actually two issues. First of all, did a Protestant invent the printing press?
No, the printing press was invented by the Catholics in Germany in the mid 14th century, I believe, by Gutenberg. 15th century by Gutenberg. And he printed the Bible, basically.
First thing that he printed was the Bible.
The first book.
The first book that was printed. But
the lady is right. They did use the printing press erroneously.
Who did?
The Protestants.
The Protestants. Okay,
they did use it, but they printed a pack of lies, basically, about the Inquisition. They were printing nonsense. So the lady is right when she says that it was used for propaganda purposes.
But they didn't invent the printing press.
No.
As a matter of fact, it was invented long before, 60 years before Luther began the Reformation. Yeah. And even before Gutenberg came up with it, where else was the printing press?
It had been in China for centuries. And also the main publishing areas of Europe for the first several centuries were all in Catholic areas, primarily Venice and the Aldine Press.
Right.
So.
In fact, it was a Catholic from Venice who made the first printing of Hebrew and printed the first Bible in Hebrew for the Jewish community in Venice.
Right, in the ghetto.
In what, 1527, something like that. So, this was, we're printing the Bible, they're printing other stuff.
Yeah.
We have another question. Hello, Thomas?
Hello, Father. How are you?
Fine. Where are you from?
Kingsport, Tennessee.
Good to have you. And what is your question?
I have a question for Mr. Stefano and Dr. Thomas. I'm wondering if they could shed some light on the case of Galileo. It was commonly believed that he was persecuted and tortured because of his heliocentric ideas and concepts as opposed to his heretical beliefs against the Catholic Church.
All right, so was Galileo taken to the Inquisition and tried as a heretic and tortured?
No, he was never tortured. He did have run-ins with the Inquisition. He was put up in the papal apartments overlooking the Vatican Gardens while he was while it was going on.
That's a tough gig.
Yeah. No, Galileo's he was not even really brought before the Inquisition for his heliocentric ideas. The Catholic Church had no problem with a heliocentric model for the universe if it could be proven. The problem with Galileo, from the Inquisition's point of view, aside from the fact that his science was bad, was that he was...
Wait, what'd you say?
Yeah, I mean, the model that he adopted, which was the Copernican model, is wrong. It puts the sun in the middle of the universe, but it makes the universe much too small, and it makes the path of the planets all circles, which means it doesn't predict anything any better than a geocentric model does.
Right. That because the planets don't go around the sun in circles, do they?
No, ellipses.
Yeah, they're elliptical.
Yeah. So because it didn't work, and because the Vatican, the papacy had Europe's oldest observatory,
astronomical
and had Jesuits all over who were working on this, they could point out that your theory doesn't work.
Right.
But aside from that, the real problem with the Inquisition was that he was bringing this into theology and scriptural exegesis. So that was where he ran afoul. And he was arrogant. But if he had been...
He called the Pope names.
Yes, he called the Pope names.
That's not nice.
But had he simply stuck to science, he would have been fine. It was just that he insisted on writing about the theological implications of his theories.
I mean, in the early stages, he had said that the proof that the Earth goes around the sun are the tides.
Right, because he said the water was sloshing as it went around. Yes.
Right, and that's
that's false.
No, that proves that the Earth is the center of the orbit of the moon.
Right, and those people who had suggested it was the moon, because it does seem to go with the phases of the moon, he was bitterly opposed to that. In fact, he said it sounded like it was some kind of cultish idea that the moon had some kind of control on the tides. So, I mean, Galileo did some wonderful things. He did use the telescope to look into the heavens, and that was good. But he was a rough person to get along with.
Apparently. But the worst punishment they gave him was what?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the Pope actually asked Galileo to write on his theories. But what Galileo did was put the words of the Pope into someone he portrayed as being stupid. So you had the Pope being mocked by Galileo. So the Pope got really angry. He said, there am I being generous to Galileo, and he does this to me. So up in front of the Inquisition he went. He was found guilty of heresy, and he was condemned to life in a comfy home. In fact, it was his aristocratic villa overlooking Florence, so it's hardly...
Yeah, the food was still good. His daughter cooked for him. But it was also, I think it's important to keep in mind that some of the Jesuits were more correct on the science than he was. Yeah. And it was more his arrogance, not the science. And I also would point out that while the Dominicans were running the Inquisition, the Jesuits were studying the heavens. Just a little.
Okay.
That's why there are more craters on the moon named after Jesuits than any other group.
That's true.
And no other group has as many craters. So we name a lot of empty holes in outer space after us. Ma'am, where are you from?
Originally, I'm from Puerto Rico, but I'm here with a group from Florida.
Great,
Florida.
Good to have you. And your question or comment?
If there were any male witches.
So were there any male witches?
Well, there were people who were brought before the witch tribunals who were males.
Yeah.
But it was, by most counts, it was 80-some% women. It was far more women than men. But there were men who were brought up.
Right.
And those women overwhelmingly tended to be accused by other women. So
sometimes women get each other just a little upset, and that's how they dealt with it. You were going to say something?
No, as that clip showed, that trial, that was a woman brought because she was accused by a jealous neighbour, and of course the inquisitors had the accused testament from the witness, and she named exactly the person who was on the list to accuse her. So they said, it's false. Her name is here. She's accusing falsely. It's a jealous neighbour. So they let her go immediately.
And, in the Salem witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, there were men accused as well as some girls and women as well. I think a boy as well. So there were males, but it was mostly females. And I remember reading that most of the women who were executed under Queen Elizabeth I, not the present, but Queen Elizabeth I actually executed, had under her reign, so that it wasn't, male rulers that were trying to control the women, as sometimes has been portrayed, but in fact, it was just people were afraid of witchcraft.
Yeah, they were about 50,000 supposed witches killed during this period, during the late medieval and early modern period.
Right.
About 50,000, and most of those were in the Protestant countries of Northern Europe.
And one of the things, too, in the witchcraft trials, it was the turning to witchcraft was oftentimes a response by people who were so confused about the competing theologies. As this church was saying, we're true. People just said, I can't figure it out. I'm going to do little folk medicine stuff and the heck with all of them. And this caused suspicions and, again, jealousies and such as that would also come in.
And many of the things that they did were actually superstitious activities that had been done for centuries in Europe.
Right.
That people had just commonly done folk magic of different kinds or folk superstitions. But because after the Reformation, the whole environment was so supercharged with wondering whether are you a heretic or not? Are you a Catholic? Are you a Protestant? Everything, these simple actions that people had done for centuries suddenly became imbued with this idea that it was now heresy rather than just a kind of a folk magic.
Right. And sometimes people, my grandmother had all these home remedies that she knew that, some people might say, well, that's witchcraft. It's just home remedies, that they had when there were no pharmacies to speak of. So that, some of that would cause suspicion. So that's all sorts of foolishness.
And the church had to make sure, in the Middle Ages, would make sure, because one of the things that people would do is try to steal the hosts and bring them back home. And there were all these different, like if you wrote things on the host and then kept it. One of the reasons why they started with putting the Eucharist on the tongue, so they could watch you consume it, so that you wouldn't bring it home for these rituals.
And that's not medieval. We just had a case a couple years ago in Oklahoma City where a group of people who wanted to do a satanic mass had taken a host from a church and they brought it to desecrate it at a big auditorium. But the Archbishop of Oklahoma City had gotten to the police to have that returned because it's something that's not to be used in that way, and it's considered something Catholic property.
Yes, witchcraft is very real, and there is evil in the world.
Right.
Just because we're saying that the Catholic Inquisitions let off a lot of witches, it doesn't mean that they don't exist.
Right. It's just that most of them were people who had either mental disturbance or false accusations.
False accusations, yeah.
To learn more, take a look at the Inquisition. a 4-part mini-series beginning October 26th tonight until the 29th. And it'll be at 9:30 p.m. each night from the October 26th to 29th. That's Eastern Time on EWTN television, as well as at EWTN.com. Or you can also get your own copy of The Inquisition, A History of Heresy's 4-part miniseries. Go to EWTNRC.com or call them at 1-800-854-6316, item HDTI. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being with us. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, we need to keep us in between your gas bill and electric bill and cable bill so we can pay our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.